Welcome to Books and More Audio, where great ideas meet the power of storytelling. In today's episode, we explore The Art of Thinking Clearly by Rolf Dobelli, a fascinating journey into how the human mind deceives itself every single day. This book reveals the invisible biases, emotional traps, and logical fallacies that shape our choices without us knowing. By uncovering these hidden errors, Dobelli teaches us how to think more clearly, decide more wisely, and live more consciously. Stay tuned, your mind is about to see itself in a whole new light. Introduction: How Our Minds Deceive Us. In the introduction of The Art of Thinking Clearly, Rolf Dobelli invites us to look closely at the hidden flaws in our reasoning, the subtle traps that shape how we see the world. He reminds us that our brains are not built for truth, but for survival. We don't analyze reality as it is. We interpret it in ways that make us feel safe, confident, and in control. Every day, we make hundreds of decisions believing they are rational, yet most are ruled by instinct, habit, and illusion. Dobelli reveals that our thinking is full of shortcuts, mental biases that once helped our ancestors act quickly, but now lead us astray in modern life. We jump to conclusions from small samples, trust vivid stories more than facts, and cling to our first impressions even when evidence proves us wrong. The author doesn't blame the mind for these errors. Instead, he teaches us to recognize them, because awareness is the first step toward clarity. Through dozens of real examples, from business to everyday choices, Dobelli shows that the key to wisdom lies not in knowing everything, but in knowing what distorts our thinking. To think clearly is not to think faster, but to pause, observe, and question the stories our brain tells us. The introduction closes with a gentle but powerful truth. You cannot stop your mind from deceiving you, but you can learn to see through its tricks. And that, perhaps, is the beginning of true intelligence. The hidden patterns of irrational thinking. In the first part of The Art of Thinking Clearly, Rolf Dobelli takes us into the invisible world of mental errors, those quiet distortions that shape our every choice without us realizing it. He begins by explaining that our brain, though brilliant, is not designed for accuracy but for efficiency. It constantly looks for shortcuts, patterns, stories, and familiar routes, even when they lead us astray. We fall into the survivorship bias, admiring successful people while forgetting the countless failures that never make headlines. We believe that hard work guarantees success because we only see those who made it. Yet behind every winner are thousands who worked just as hard but vanished without notice. In the same way, confirmation bias makes us seek evidence that supports our existing beliefs and ignore whatever challenges them. We don't want the truth, we want comfort. Dobelli also reveals the authority bias, where we trust experts blindly, and the anchoring effect, which makes us cling to the first number or impression we see, even if it's irrelevant. Whether buying a car or negotiating a salary, the first figure sets the mental anchor that controls our judgment. Our mind doesn't compare facts, it compares feelings. Through vivid examples, the author shows how even intelligent people fall prey to the availability bias, overestimating events that are easy to recall, like plane crashes or stock market booms, while underestimating quiet but constant realities. We are not guided by statistics, but by what our memory can quickly bring to mind. In this section, Dobelli doesn't simply list biases, he exposes their emotional roots. We believe we are logical, but beneath every thought lies a need to belong, to feel safe, to be right. Rationality, he says, is a fragile layer covering an ocean of instincts. The wiser path is not to reject emotion, but to be aware of when it leads us instead of us leading it. Part 1 ends with a clear message. Thinking clearly begins with humility. Only when we admit that our mind is biased can we start to see reality as it is, not as we wish it to be. Part 2: Illusions of Logic and the Fallacy of Control. In Part 2 of The Art of Thinking Clearly, Rolf Dobelli explores the subtle ways we misuse logic and overestimate our ability to control life. He shows that even when we believe we are thinking rationally, our decisions are guided by emotions, habits, and invisible assumptions. He begins with the illusion of knowledge, the belief that understanding a few details means we grasp the whole picture. We form opinions after reading headlines, assuming expertise after watching a single documentary. But knowledge is not built on fragments. It requires patience, doubt, and humility. The mind prefers shortcuts, so it trades depth for the comfort of certainty. Then comes the gambler's fallacy, the idea that the past influences the future in random events. After tossing 5 heads in a row, we believe the next coin must be tails. Yet probability has no memory. This simple error is responsible for countless bad bets, both in casinos and in life. Our brains crave patterns, even when none exist. Dobelli also examines loss aversion, one of the strongest biases in human psychology. Losing hurts twice as much as winning feels good. That's why investors cling to failing stocks, and why we keep toxic relationships, because the pain of loss feels unbearable. Rationally, we know cutting losses is wise, but emotionally, it feels like surrender. The secret, Dobelli says, is to reframe loss not as failure, but as freedom. Another illusion arises from social proof, the belief that if many people do something, it must be right. From fashion to finance, we copy the crowd because conformity feels safe. But the majority is not always wise, it's often merely loud. Clear thinking demands the courage to stand alone, especially when the herd runs toward the cliff. The authority fallacy also distorts judgment. We assume experts are right simply because they wear lab coats or hold titles. Yet even the smartest minds are victims of their own biases. Dobelli urges us to question credentials, not out of cynicism, but to remember that no human mind is infallible. Then comes the illusion of control, the belief that we can predict or influence outcomes more than we truly can. From business forecasts to daily routines, we cling to rituals that make us feel secure. The truth, however, is that most of life is shaped by randomness. Recognizing uncertainty is not weakness, it's wisdom. Only when we accept what we can't control do we begin to act effectively within what we can. Part 2 ends with a quiet revelation. Our errors don't come from stupidity, but from humanity. We seek meaning in chaos, certainty in ambiguity, and control in chance. To think clearly is not to eliminate these instincts, but to see them, to smile at the illusions of logic and walk past them, one aware step at a time. Part 3. The illusion of patterns and the logic of the irrational. In Part 3 of The Art of Thinking Clearly, Rolf Dobelli delves into one of the most fascinating truths about human nature. We are pattern-seeking creatures living in a random world. Our brains are wired to connect dots, to make sense of chaos. And this instinct, though once vital for survival, now causes us to see meaning where there is none. He begins with the clustering illusion, our tendency to see order in random data. When we notice coincidences or repetitions, we instantly believe they reveal a deeper truth, lucky numbers, winning streaks, or reoccurring signs. But in reality, randomness often produces clusters naturally. We are not witnessing fate, we are witnessing probability. Yet our brains refuse to accept that the world can be senseless, so we invent stories to make it coherent. Dobelli also discusses the hindsight bias, the illusion that events were predictable after they happen. Once something occurs, we tell ourselves, "I knew it all along." This bias distorts memory and builds false confidence. We forget what we didn't know and rewrite the past to make ourselves appear wise. The danger, he warns, is that hindsight makes us overconfident about predicting the future, a trap both investors and leaders fall into again and again. Another bias explored is the self-attribution error, the habit of crediting success to skill but blaming failure on bad luck. When we win, it's because we're smart. When we lose, it's because the market was unfair. This illusion keeps our ego safe but blinds us to growth. True wisdom begins when we stop explaining away our mistakes and start learning from them. He then introduces the outcome bias, judging a decision solely by its result. A reckless choice that happens to succeed seems brilliant, while a wise choice that fails looks foolish. But results are not always proof of quality. Luck often disguises itself as skill. Dobelli reminds us that a good decision can lead to a bad outcome, and the mark of clear thinking is knowing the difference. Equally dangerous is the neglect of probability, our tendency to ignore odds and exaggerate rare events. We fear plane crashes but ignore the daily risk of unhealthy habits. We insure against freak accidents but not against poor decisions. The human mind, he says, is not built to think statistically, it is built to think emotionally. Throughout this part, Dobelli paints a picture of a mind constantly trying to simplify the complex, to turn uncertainty into narrative. We crave explanation more than truth. We would rather believe a false pattern than face chaos. Yet the essence of wisdom lies in humility, in accepting that life is less predictable, less logical, and far less under our control than we imagine. Part 3 concludes with a liberating thought. To think clearly is not to eliminate emotion or randomness, but to live peacefully with them. When we learn to see the world without forcing meaning upon it, we stop being victims of illusion and begin to see at last with clarity. Part 4. Reason, Statistics, and the Subtle Art of Self-Deception. In Part 4 of The Art of Thinking Clearly, Rolf Dobelli explores the limits of logic, how easily our minds turn reason into illusion. He reminds us that we don't think like scientists, we think like storytellers. Our brains prefer coherence to truth, and in the gap between data and emotion, error quietly takes root. He begins with the problem of induction, the classic fallacy of believing that what has always happened will continue to happen. Because the sun has risen every day, we assume it always will. 1,000 peaceful mornings convince us tomorrow will be the same, until the black swan arrives. The mind, seeking security, mistakes repetition for certainty. We forget that every pattern, however stable, depends on assumptions that can collapse at any moment. Then comes loss aversion, the emotional bias that makes losses feel twice as painful as equivalent gains feel pleasurable. We cling to bad investments, failing relationships, or outdated beliefs, not because they serve us, but because we can't bear the pain of letting go. Rationally, we know the future matters more than the past, but emotionally, the past holds us hostage. True freedom begins when we stop confusing loss with failure. Dobelli also highlights social loafing, our tendency to do less when responsibility is shared. In groups, effort diffuses, the we disguises the laziness of the I. From offices to committees, teamwork often hides inertia rather than multiplying strength. Only when each person feels accountable does collective intelligence truly emerge. The author continues with the exponential growth illusion, showing how humans are naturally blind to compounding change. We think linearly, not exponentially. 2% growth seems trivial, but over time it becomes monumental, whether in wealth, population, or debt. Because our intuition can't grasp the curve, we act too late and react too slowly. What begins as a whisper ends as a roar. Another trap is the winner's curse. In auctions or competition, the victor often pays the highest price not out of insight but out of overconfidence. In business and love alike, the one who wins may simply be the one most blinded by desire. What looks like triumph often hides self-deception. Dobelli then turns to the fundamental attribution error, our tendency to judge others by their character but ourselves by circumstance. When someone fails, we blame laziness. When we fail, we blame bad luck. This double standard keeps us self-righteous and prevents empathy. Understanding others, he argues, starts with recognizing our own biases. He also exposes false causality, seeing cause and effect where there is only coincidence. If coffee drinkers live longer, we assume coffee grants longevity, forgetting that healthier people might simply enjoy coffee more. Our brains hate uncertainty, so they invent order. But comfort is not clarity, and correlation is not causation. The halo effect further distorts perception. One positive trait colors everything else. We assume attractive people are kind, confident speakers are intelligent, and successful leaders are moral. Yet charm and virtue rarely come in the same package. The halo blinds us to the whole person, reducing complexity to illusion. Dobelli warns against the alternative path fallacy, judging success by visible winners and forgetting invisible losers. We celebrate billionaires, forgetting millions who tried the same path and failed. Survival bias feeds our myths of meritocracy, while the unseen failures tell the truer story. Finally, he ends with the forecast illusion, our obsession with predicting the future despite constant failure. Experts forecast markets, economies, and elections, yet are wrong more often than chance. Still, we listen because prediction gives us comfort. The truth is humbling. The future is not to be known, only prepared for. Part 4 closes with a simple insight. The danger of reasoning is not that we lack logic, but that we use logic to defend our emotions. We crave order, not truth, meaning, not randomness. Clear thinking does not require perfect knowledge. It requires humility, the courage to admit that the world and our own minds are far less certain than we wish to believe. Part 5. The Subtle Errors of Reasoning and the Illusion of Rationality. In Part 5 of The Art of Thinking Clearly, Rolf Dobelli exposes how the human mind twists logic into illusion. Even when we believe we are being rational, our thoughts are shaped by emotion, language, and cognitive shortcuts that quietly distort judgment. He begins with the conjunction fallacy, the belief that detailed stories are more likely than simple facts. When told that Linda is a bank teller active in the feminist movement, most people think that description is more probable than Linda is a bank teller. In truth, adding conditions always reduces probability. The mind doesn't calculate, it imagines. We mistake plausible for true. Next comes the framing effect, how wording changes perception. A doctor who says, "This surgery has a 90% survival rate," inspires confidence, while 10% of patients die evokes fear, though both mean the same. We don't respond to reality itself, but to the frame that wraps it. Marketing, politics, and media thrive on this bias. Change the frame and you change belief. Dobelli also examines action bias, the compulsion to act simply to feel in control. After missing a goalkeeper leaps in the next shot even when standing still would save more points. In crises, we rush to do something, though inaction might be wiser. Movement feels safer than patience, yet often leads to worse outcomes. Omission bias deepens the illusion. We forgive harm caused by inaction more easily than harm caused by action. A doctor who avoids risky treatment and loses a patient feels less guilt than one whose treatment fails, even if the result is the same. Our moral compass, built on emotion, weighs sins of commission more heavily than sins of omission. Then comes self-serving bias, the tendency to claim success as personal merit and blame failure on external causes. When we win, it's because we're skilled. When we lose, it's because the world was unfair. This preserves our ego, but kills self-awareness. Growth begins, Dobelli insists, when we stop defending our mistakes and start learning from them. He continues with the hedonic treadmill, humanity's endless chase for happiness. We adapt to every success, returning quickly to the same emotional baseline. Promotion, wealth, or fame bring only temporary joy. The mind is built to desire, not to rest. True satisfaction lies not in gaining more, but in wanting less. Self-selection bias deceives us when we misread cause and effect. Prestigious universities seem to create brilliant students, but perhaps brilliant students simply choose those schools. Many success stories are the result of who enters the system, not the system itself. Without recognizing this bias, we mistake correlation for superiority. The association bias makes us link unrelated experiences. We avoid a restaurant after one bad meal, or trust someone because they remind us of a friend. Emotion fuses coincidence into cause, weaving a web of false connections that feel true. The brain prefers pattern over uncertainty, story over statistics. Dobelli then explores beginner's luck, success born of chance mistaken for talent. A few early wins inflate confidence, leading to reckless risks that soon erase the gain. Understanding luck's role is not cynicism, he says, but realism. Fortune smiles randomly, not just on the skilled. Finally, cognitive dissonance closes the section. When belief and reality clash, we don't change behavior, we rewrite belief. A smoker says, "My grandfather smoked and lived to 90. A dissatisfied worker insists, "At least my job is secure." The mind bends truth to protect comfort. We don't seek truth, we seek consistency. Part 5 concludes with a powerful insight. The human brain is not an engine of reason, but a master of justification. Each bias is a mirror, showing how we create meaning to defend our emotions. To think clearly is not to escape illusion, but to recognize it, to see when the voice of logic is merely the whisper of comfort disguised as truth. Part 6, Decision Fatigue and the Illusion of Control. In Part 6 of The Art of Thinking Clearly, Rolf Dobelli explores how exhaustion, emotion, and hidden biases quietly hijack our decision-making. He reminds us that we are not as rational as we think. We are simply creatures managing limited mental energy. He begins with decision fatigue, the gradual erosion of willpower after making too many choices. Each decision, no matter how small, consumes cognitive energy. Judges are more lenient in the morning and harsher by evening. Consumers buy impulsively at the checkout counter. When the mind tires, it takes shortcuts, defaulting to the easiest or safest option. The best decisions, Dobelli warns, are made when the mind is still fresh. Then comes the contagion bias, our primitive belief that things carry invisible essences. We feel uncomfortable wearing a murderer's sweater, even if it's clean, or value an object touched by a celebrity. This magical thinking, Dobelli explains, reveals that emotion often overrides reason. We still live, unconsciously, in a symbolized world where touch seems to transfer moral energy. Another trap is the introspection illusion, the belief that we understand our own motives. When asked why we chose something, we invent logical explanations, though most choices are driven by unconscious emotion. The truth is humbling. We are strangers to ourselves, yet fully confident in our self-knowledge. Awareness begins not with certainty, but with doubt. The inability to close doors follows our fear of missing out. We keep too many options open, believing flexibility equals freedom. But freedom without focus is chaos. Like a traveler visiting every city but belonging nowhere, we exhaust ourselves in endless possibility. Wisdom lies not in having all choices, but in knowing which ones to close. Dobelli also highlights neomania, the obsession with newness. Society worships innovation, new phones, new ideas, new lifestyles, yet novelty rarely equals progress. Most new things are cosmetic, not revolutionary. Our addiction to novelty stems from evolution. What's new might once have meant survival. But in the modern world, it means distraction. Not everything that's new is better, and not everything old is obsolete. Next comes the sleeper effect, showing how weak messages grow stronger over time. We may distrust information from an unreliable source, yet as memory fades, we forget the source and remember only the message. Months later, we repeat the falsehood as truth. Propaganda and misinformation exploit this bias perfectly. Repetition outlasts reasoning. Finally, Dobelli explores social comparison bias, the discomfort we feel around people more talented than us. Leaders often hire weaker subordinates to protect their ego, slowly degrading the organization's quality. Envy poisons collaboration, insecurity limits progress. The truly confident, he says, are those who surround themselves with people smarter than they are. Throughout Part 6, Dobelli reminds us that the mind's greatest enemy is not ignorance, but exhaustion and the illusion that we are in control. We act out of pride, fatigue, and emotion, yet rationalize our behavior afterward as logic. To think clearly is to recognize when your energy, not your reason, is making the choice. The art of wisdom begins not in mastering thought, but in knowing when the mind is too tired to think at all. Part 7, When Data Deceives Us. In Part 7 of The Art of Thinking Clearly, Rolf Dobelli examines how even facts and data, the very things we trust most, can mislead us. The problem, he says, is not the information itself, but how our brains interpret it. We don't process statistics, we tell stories about them. He begins with the law of small numbers, our tendency to draw sweeping conclusions from tiny samples. A few brilliant students make us think a school is exceptional. A handful of successful startups convinces us that anyone can make it. But small samples amplify luck and randomness. What we call evidence often reflects nothing more than chance. Then comes the expectation effect, the self-fulfilling power of belief. When teachers expect certain students to excel, they unconsciously treat them differently, and the students perform better. Likewise, believing a pill will work can make us feel better, even if it's a placebo. Our minds don't just observe reality, they participate in shaping it. Dobelli continues with the illusion of simple logic, our need to find easy explanations for complex systems. When markets crash, we crave a single cause: greed, inflation, a politician's speech. But the world rarely offers one neat reason. Complexity resists simplification, yet we keep simplifying because it feels good to understand, even falsely. The Forer effect, believing vague statements describe us perfectly, is another example of how easily we're fooled. Horoscopes, personality quizzes, and fortune tellers all exploit this bias. We fill in the blanks ourselves, turning ambiguity into personal truth. It's not manipulation, it's cooperation between our vanity and our imagination. Dobelli also exposes volunteers' folly, the illusion that good intentions guarantee good outcomes. Charity, activism, or social work can have unintended side effects if done without insight. Helping without understanding may satisfy emotion but worsen the problem. Moral satisfaction is not the same as moral success. Next is the affect heuristic, where emotions override evidence. When we like something, we see its risks as lower and its benefits as higher. When we dislike it, we do the opposite. Investors, voters, and consumers all mistake feelings for facts. The more emotionally charged an issue, the less logical our thinking becomes. He revisits the introspection illusion, reminding us that we rarely understand the true reasons behind our choices. We invent explanations that sound rational, but reason often arrives after emotion, not before it. Dobelli also warns of the inability to close doors, our fear of commitment that keeps us juggling endless options. The more choices we have, the more restless and dissatisfied we become. Happiness isn't having everything, it's knowing what to let go. Then comes neomania, our obsession with what's new. We equate novelty with progress, though most new ideas are old ones with better packaging. This constant pursuit of next blinds us to enduring wisdom. Old truths don't stop being true just because they're unfashionable. Finally, the sleeper effect shows how misinformation lingers. A false statement may be rejected at first, but as memory fades, we forget its unreliable source and remember only the message. Over time, lies harden into common sense. In the information age, repetition beats accuracy. Part 7 concludes with a sobering realization. Facts alone don't make us rational. What matters is how we interpret them, how we resist turning data into stories that flatter our emotions. True clarity, Dobelli says, comes from humility, the willingness to admit that even when we know the numbers, we can still be wrong. Part 8, Society, Comparison, and the Subtle Art of Self-Illusion. In Part 8 of The Art of Thinking Clearly, Rolf Dobelli turns from the inner workings of the individual mind to the collective illusions of society, showing how our thoughts, values, and even sense of self are quietly shaped by others. We do not think in isolation, we think inside a social mirror that constantly distorts reality. He begins with alternative blindness, our tendency to see only the options presented to us. When facing two choices, we forget that countless others exist outside the frame. We see life as either or, though it's often both and or something else entirely. By accepting the boundaries of a problem too quickly, we imprison our creativity within invisible walls. Next is social comparison bias, the instinct to measure ourselves against others. We rarely evaluate life by absolute standards. Instead, we ask, am I doing better than them? This bias feeds envy and insecurity. Even managers and leaders fall victim to it, hiring people less capable than themselves to protect their ego. Over time, this weakens both organizations and relationships. Comparison may motivate us, but it also poisons contentment. Dobelli explores the primacy and recency effects, which reveal how memory favors beginnings and endings. We remember the first and last impressions of an experience, but forget the middle. Politicians, advertisers, and storytellers use this to their advantage. What's said first sets the tone, and what's said last lingers. We don't recall the truth, we recall what struck us emotionally. He then discusses the not invented here syndrome, a form of intellectual arrogance. Many people reject ideas simply because they weren't their own. Companies waste years reinventing the wheel to preserve pride, while individuals ignore wisdom that doesn't come from within their circle. Ego prefers ownership to progress. Dobelli revisits the black swan theory, emphasizing how people underestimate the impact of rare, unpredictable events. We pretend the world is stable, then act shocked when crises, revolutions, or breakthroughs disrupt everything. Afterward, we rewrite history to make it seem predictable. The mind craves narrative, even if that narrative is false. True wisdom lies in preparing for the unexpected, not explaining it afterward. Another illusion is domain dependence, the belief that intelligence in one field transfers to another. A brilliant mathematician may make poor life choices. A successful business person may fail at relationships. Knowledge doesn't easily cross domains, yet our confidence does. Understanding something deeply in one area doesn't make us wise everywhere. Dobelli also highlights the false consensus effect, our assumption that others think like us. We project our values and opinions onto the world, mistaking personal perspective for universal truth. This illusion keeps us trapped in echo chambers both online and in real life. The consensus we perceive is often just the echo of our own beliefs. In The Falsification of Memory, he reminds us that the past is not fixed. We rewrite it constantly. Memory is not a recording. It's a reconstruction shaped by emotion and ego. We emphasize victories, soften failures, and retell our stories until they fit the person we want to believe we are. Each of us becomes the author of a self-serving autobiography. Then comes in-group, out-group bias, the instinct to favor us and distrust them. Whether in politics, culture, or daily life, this tribal thinking fuels prejudice and conflict. The tragedy, Dobelli notes, is that most human cruelty arises not from malice, but from loyalty, from loving one group too much to see another's humanity. Finally, ambiguity aversion explains why we fear the unknown more than actual risk. People prefer a 40% known chance of loss over an uncertain gamble that might be better simply because uncertainty feels uncomfortable. Yet life itself is uncertain. Clarity, Dobelli concludes, comes not from eliminating ambiguity, but from learning to live peacefully within it. Part 9. Habits, Defaults, and the Hidden Forces Behind Our Choices. In Part 9 of The Art of Thinking Clearly, Rolf Dobelli shifts from abstract reasoning to everyday behavior, revealing how our actions are shaped less by logic than by inertia, emotion, and subtle psychological triggers. We like to think we make deliberate choices, but more often, we simply follow the path of least resistance. He begins with the default effect, our tendency to accept preset options instead of making active decisions. Whether it's joining a pension plan or agreeing to data sharing online, most people stick with whatever is selected for them. Not because it's best, but because thinking takes effort. Designers, politicians, and marketers exploit this bias to steer behavior. In a world of infinite options, the easiest choice is often no choice at all. Next comes the fear of regret, which makes us overly cautious. We avoid taking risks not because failure is certain, but because we dread the pain of what if. Ironically, this fear leads to the very regret we hope to escape, the regret of never trying. Dobelli reminds us that every decision carries some regret. The goal is not to avoid it, but to choose the regrets worth having. He then describes the salience effect, where we pay attention to what's visible and ignore what's hidden. We judge wealth by cars, intelligence by eloquence, success by appearances. Yet the things that truly matter, integrity, consistency, kindness, rarely make noise. The brain, built for survival, reacts to brightness, motion, and novelty, not depth. The visible blinds us to the valuable. Another bias, the house money effect, explains why we treat money differently depending on its source. Winnings or bonuses feel like free money, so we spend or gamble it recklessly. But money doesn't know where it came from, only we do. The illusion of extra wealth leads to foolish risks. Rationally, every dollar is equal. Emotionally, it's not. Dobelli also explores procrastination, one of humanity's oldest paradoxes. We know what we should do, but we don't do it. The reason, he says, lies in our skewed perception of time. The brain values immediate comfort over distant rewards. Future pain feels unreal, while present pleasure feels absolute. Willpower fails not from weakness, but from the brain's faulty arithmetic of time. Then comes envy, a destructive yet universal emotion. Unlike jealousy, which fears loss, envy resents others' success. Social media has made it omnipresent. We compare our reality to everyone else's highlight reel. The result is endless dissatisfaction. Dobelli calls envy the most useless emotion because it punishes the envious and rewards no one. Freedom begins when we measure life by our own progress, not by others' possessions. He continues with personification, our instinct to attribute human qualities to things. We say the market is nervous, nature is angry, luck betrayed me. Such metaphors make the world feel understandable, but distort reality. The universe isn't personal, yet our storytelling brains insist on making it so. The illusion of attention follows, the false belief that we notice everything important. In truth, we see only what we expect to see. Experiments show that people can miss a man in a gorilla suit walking through a basketball game because they're focused elsewhere. Our attention is narrow, selective, and fragile. We live in a world far richer than what we ever perceive. Next is strategic misrepresentation, the subtle bias of exaggerating positives and hiding negatives to persuade others or ourselves. Politicians promise, marketers embellish, and we do the same in our daily lives. These white lies seem harmless, but they distort reality. Over time, they create a culture of optimism that ignores risk and consequence. Finally, Dobelli discusses overthinking, the illusion that more analysis leads to better outcomes. In truth, excessive rumination breeds confusion, not clarity. The world's most effective thinkers know when to stop thinking and start acting. Clarity is not born from endless logic, but from decisive simplicity. Part 9 concludes with a humbling insight. We are not the masters of our choices. We are the products of our habits, fears, and mental shortcuts. To think clearly is not to eliminate these forces, but to recognize them. Once we see how easily our brain is nudged, we can begin to reclaim the one freedom that truly matters, the freedom to choose consciously. Part 10. The Final Illusions and the Art of Seeing Clearly. In Part 10 of The Art of Thinking Clearly, Rolf Dobelli brings its exploration to a thoughtful close. After leading us through dozens of cognitive traps, he reminds us that the goal is not perfection, but awareness. Human thinking will never be flawless, yet by recognizing our illusions, we can become wiser, calmer, and more deliberate. He begins with the planning fallacy, our chronic tendency to underestimate time, cost, and risk. Whether it's building a bridge, writing a book, or finishing a project, we always assume this time will be different. Optimism fuels motivation but blinds us to reality. The antidote, Dobelli says, is to plan with outside perspective. Compare with similar projects, not with our hopes. Be optimistic in action, but pessimistic in prediction. Next comes deformation professionnelle, or the law of the hammer. When you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Specialists see the world through their own narrow lens. Doctors, economists, engineers, each interpreting every problem according to their expertise. But no single tool fits every challenge. Wisdom requires more than depth, it requires perspective. He then explores the Zeigarnik effect, our mind's obsession with unfinished tasks. Incomplete projects haunt our thoughts, while completed ones fade quickly. This drive for closure pushes us to keep busy, often confusing motion with progress. Yet not every door must be closed. Some ambiguity is part of life's design. Knowing what to leave unfinished is its own kind of mastery. Dobelli examines the illusion of skill, the false belief that success always reflects talent. In domains full of randomness, investing, politics, or entertainment, luck plays a far greater role than we admit. A few lucky wins create confidence. Confidence invites risk, and risk often ends in ruin. Clear thinkers respect chance. They judge decisions by process, not by outcome. Another subtle trap is the feature positive effect, our bias toward what's present rather than what's absent. We notice long reports, but not the missing data, the visible success, but not the hidden failure. We assume that what we see is all there is. In truth, what's invisible often carries the real story. He warns against cherry picking, the manipulation of data by highlighting only the successes. Media, business leaders, and even scientists fall prey to this bias, selecting evidence that fits their narrative. It's the reason success stories seem simple. We see the winners, not the thousands who failed. Truth lives not in examples, but in the unseen average. Dobelli also highlights the fallacy of the single cause, our craving for simple explanations. We want one reason for complex phenomena: war because of greed, failure because of laziness, love because of destiny. Yet real life resists such clarity. Every event has multiple tangled causes. The search for one root reason is not wisdom, it's simplification disguised as understanding. The intention to treat error follows, distorting data by excluding inconvenient results. A drug looks effective only because those who quit the trial are ignored. Similarly, policies or business models appear successful when failures are left out. Our world, Dobelli notes, is full of half-told stories that confirm what we want to believe. He concludes with the news illusion, one of the most dangerous of all. We think constant news consumption makes us informed, but it actually makes us anxious and distracted. News delivers fragments, shocking, emotional, disconnected. It rewards reaction, not reflection. Dobelli urges readers to step back from the daily noise, to trade information overload for meaningful insight. Part 10 ends with a powerful truth. To think clearly is not to remove emotion, but to recognize illusion. Every bias is a mirror showing where humanity hides from uncertainty. We will never see perfectly, but by seeing our blindness, we see enough. True intelligence, Dobelli writes, is not knowing everything, but knowing how easily we can be fooled.